Anyway, did you want to back up and look at verses 1 and 2, Ben? I feel like maybe I pushed us in a little bit deep there.
When I was actually going over the book, this one, it mentions that Paul's introduction of rather the servants of Jesus Christ rather than an apostle of Jesus Christ. And the book brought up the idea that maybe there was troubles in the church of Philippi, which I thought was an interesting perspective. But when I read it over, I see the warnings to later on to false teachers in that, but I did not see the correlation with problems with the leadership at Philippi. Would you say that you came to the same sort of conclusion?
I think Paul makes it clear that there's something going on, but he doesn't necessarily make it clear that it's going on in Philippi. Yeah. Like, it could well be that toward, I think I'm referring to where he talks about verses 15 to maybe 18, where he's talking about this idea of preaching Christ, even from envy and strife, and then he talks about not doing it sincerely and so forth. You could say, if he's talking to the Philippian leaders, you could say, oh, well, that's pretty obvious. But he doesn't make it clear that, like, he just says some, he doesn't say some here.
Yeah, exactly.
Normally he would, I feel. So I feel like he could be using that as an example from somewhere he's been previous.
Yeah, I thought it might have been more of a warning of something that he's seen.
In that passage that you were just referencing there, from verse 16, where it talks about the former preached Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my chains. Is that the category of person you're talking about? Did I miss something? Yeah. The N.T. Wright suggests that is actually pagans that were in the city who wanted to make life in prison as hard as possible for Paul, and so they were like pretending to highlight the gospel, so to speak, but they were trying to do it to create an uproar because then Paul would be negatively affected in prison. And so he's saying, hey, that's cool with me. Like, even if you're just pretending to follow Christ and you're getting the message out further, that's great. Message is still getting preached either way. So
yeah, I could definitely see that sort of thing happening because he definitely would have been in a Roman prison.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the time of Nero, isn't it?
Is it Nero or is it just before Nero?
It's around about that time.
Around about that time.
And I know early on in Nero's reign, one of the things he did was, because he wasn't that popular, so in order to unify people, he unified the pagans against the Christians. And there's every chance that these being Romans would have tried to emulate that sort of idea where, making Paul's life awful would be something the emperor would do.
Yeah, and also you got to keep in mind that Philippi was one of the centers of emperor worship, and so nearby towns weren't as bad, but Philippi itself was very well known for that, and so preaching Christ in Philippi would have been a fairly dangerous enterprise. So.
Yeah, because a lot of the Romans expected you to come along and do the whole worship, so you had to burn incense upon an altar before their
deities? Is that the word you're looking for?
Deities. Basically, their emperors had become deities, and they wanted to
deified leaders,
and worship them. Basically, so it would have been very opposed to Christian thinking.
Just with regard to verse 1 as well, Ben, I thought it was really interesting when I scanned Acts before after you referenced it. He's only just started working with Timothy at this point. Timothy is like a brand new apprentice when they go to Philippi. Or maybe not at the time of the writing of the letter, but when they went to Philippi. And yet he greets the Philippian church, Paul and Timothy, bondservants of Jesus Christ. So Timothy's work in Philippi must have also been quite significant. And we'll learn about that a little bit more when we get to chapter 2 as well. But yeah, I think that's fascinating that Timothy is mentioned here as being someone of substance to the church in Philippi.
Oh, it makes sense with he becomes a church leader later on in life. So we can see here the beginnings of that.
Just to go to verse 6, so we sort of hit 5 and...
Can't.
We hit 5 and then we kind of just went bing, 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 bing all around the chapter.
Yeah, that's because you started in 5. What was with that? You've got to start at 1, mate.
I got excited about 5, all right? In verse 6... I'm going to verse 6.
That's fine. You're the boss.
So I just wanted to point out that the themes in verse 6, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. That is...
this is still his prayer, by the way.
Yeah, this is still his prayer. But this is something that we sort of see him revisit, right? These themes, these ideas are consistent throughout the book. But I think this is one of the really key themes that Paul is trying to get across here, that Jesus is the one that is accomplishing a good work in you, and we can have confidence in that. Or, you could say we have faith in Jesus. But this is what he means, I think, in a practical sense, that he's in the process of making us into his sons and daughters, and it's the process that he is in charge of, right? He is in the process of doing that, and we can have faith and confidence in that.
Yeah, the grammar's interesting, isn't it? Complete until the day.
Yes.
Like you don't, like, normally you complete something and then that's it. Like, you don't go on completing something once it's finished.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing completion.
Yeah. It's like, yep.
Yeah, I mean, that rings true, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think Wright said in his commentary on Philippians that he sees that as a cornerstone verse for the rest of the book.
Yes.
This confidence that Paul is speaking of to the church in Philippi, that it then goes on to inform the instruction and the exhortation that he gives them.
Do you think he's making reference to, perhaps secondarily, to like the righteousness by faith experience, that we can have faith in Christ's work in us?
Before I answer your question, can we just read it with verse 5? Because I feel like we know verse 6, but we don't know it in its context.
Sure.
So he's just gone on about how he's so thankful for the church and he loves praying for them. And he says, I pray for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. I think that's a really important point there. First day until now, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you from the first day will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. So he's saying to the church in Philippi, he has great confidence in God to bring the work that he started in the church in Philippi to a completion, or to finishing, perfecting, maturing the work that he's doing in their lives over time. So then answering your question, of course, I think there's righteousness by faith themes coming through the verse here. But I actually think Paul is, I think the context really indicates that what Paul is actually saying is that he is confident that they are going to reach maturation because of God's work in them, which I think is instructive to us about people that we might choose to mentor, because we can have that level of confidence also. Even when somebody might not seem to be getting it, they might not seem to be progressing as well. And of course, that's true of us as well, right? We can have confidence that God's going to finish the work in us too. But really, what Paul is saying, he has confidence that God is going to finish the work in them.
This is a pastoral confidence,
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I hope that everybody listening is seeking to be a mentor to somebody, right? I think everybody should have a mentor and be a mentor. And so if you're seeking to be a mentor for somebody, this is a promise for you, right? Yeah. That you can have the same confidence that Paul had, because God is not going to stop working in somebody's life,
Do you find that easy, or like
having confidence?
As in having confidence in the process, like in what God's going to do in someone else, like in that pastoral way? Like, do you struggle with that, or is that easy for you?
Is this an open question, or is this to me directly?
Oh, well, you're the one that said it, and so you've thought about it, so I directed it to you first, but it is an open question.
I mean, I feel like I find it easier now than I ever have before.
Yeah.
That might be due to age and experience. That might be due to my confidence in God growing, potentially. I'm not sure. But I mean, I think so. Yeah. No, it seems like a wrong answer, but I honestly think I do.
I think you're better at it than I am, that's for sure. But especially when I was earlier in my experience, there were times, especially when people would move away or something like that I could see they were so close to making a decision, or maybe they had made a decision and they were not established in the faith yet. And when they would move away, I just feel like all of that... it was going to disappear, like somehow that was just going to fall away. And so, but I have had other experiences that have started, I guess, my process of building that trust. There was some people that I was Bible studying with a few years ago, and they moved away before they had been baptized, and I had that experience of, oh no, like now all of that work is sort of just going to evaporate. And then like a year later, I got a message from them thanking me for like my time in studying with them, and that they had got baptized at the church that they moved to. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. But I didn't do that, right? That was great for my faith that God is looking after these people. It's not me that's being their guard dog, you know. Yeah.
I always find great confidence in the passage, Luke, with regard to what you were just describing there. Where Paul talks about how that in the work of God, it's not necessarily your job to bring somebody through the full cycle of harvest. He talks about one planting, one watering, and another harvesting, and there might be another stage in there that I've missed. But that's in 1 Corinthians 3 if anyone's interested in looking that up. But I think that's something I find great encouragement in, because of course there's opportunity to be discouraged. But I think over time you get to see God working, and you realize I would have loved to have been involved in the harvest there, of course, but this was a time for me to plant or for me to water. Someone else will come along and do the
do the
finishing touches and harvest that. I think that's all right. I'll let that one slide through. I was going to go
through to the keeper.
To practical, but probably to more depth than we need to go. So,
sure.
Also, just taking it back to where you were going, because I think it's also a great promise for our lives personally, right? That we can be confident, because I think sometimes on the Christian journey, we're headed on the upward path, right? On our way up to heaven. But sometimes you take, a step forward and then you take 3 back. And it's very easy to get discouraged at that point. But this promises for you in that moment, right? That God hasn't finished working with you, right? Just because you've stuffed up, and you've made a mistake and you've turned away or whatever, God doesn't then give up on you. He's going to continue pushing you forward, continue, blessing you. So anyway, I just think that's really cool.
Yeah, that's why I love a lot of the stories with the Old Testament. They're good examples of exact thing. Because
there were some idiots there, eh?
Yeah, they are.
Idiots here too.
That's what I mean. That's why it's so good news.
Yeah. It gives us confidence, because we look at them and they're such great people, but they're very flawed, just like us. So God can do great things with us, even with our flaws.
Yeah. Just read Hebrews 11 and you're like,
why is he here?
Okay, God, you see things a little different than we do.
Amen to that.
Thank God for that too.